My family were, I'm originally from Charlotte County, and so we were up on a local public beach, and my uncle had actually found at the time what he thought was a spear point. It turned out to be a large core from this location. We walked out to look at where he had found it from, and literally the entire beach was full of artifacts like this at the time. Even though there was people all around, nobody had recognized it. And so the object on the right is the first object that I found. The object on the left is the first object that my brother had found, and what they represent is very, very old, again, further refutation of this notion that people were not here at the time. These are artifacts that are used between about 6,000 years ago and about 8,500 years ago. And so what you're looking at is another style of net. This is a longitudinally grooved net weight. Sorry, this is a longitudinally grooved cobble. That was so again, people are changing the style of tools that they use over time. So you've seen two other net weights. This is another style that is used in what we refer to as the Middle Archaic period. Interestingly, it's on the St. George pink granite. The tool is made from. It's the oldest tool made from that material that we've yet found. Again, could be as old as 8,500 years. These were found on the surface, so we couldn't put a direct date on them. Now, the object on the right is actually a fully grooved or three-quarter grooved groundstone axe that's made from on a crystal plagioclase tuff, which we believe likely comes from a source to the north of so northern part of Charlotte County, and may in fact have been found as a glacial cobble that was glacially transported and then turned into an. But these are extremely hard materials. These are massive igneous. The raw materials are igneous and very, very coarse grained, as opposed to the cryptocrystalline. And so what you're seeing is, for certain tasks, certain rocks are much more are appropriate. So you can have both fine grained and kind of more coarser grained materials will work for something like a net weight. Doesn't really matter. It's the density and the weight of it. There's also another one of these that was found, that I found the same day as these ones back in 1995. That is it's a quartzite, which is extremely, extremely dense. But the thing about the axe is it's a very, very, very dense material. It's also a very homogeneous. I mean, it's heterogeneous in its makeup, because it has all these crystal structures. But it also does not spall. Like if something was finer or more homogeneous than this, you would expect that you might actually have a break or a spall coming off the working edge that would actually propagate over the whole material. With these axes and this material, you can see that it's very resistant to that. And so again, this is 8,000 years ago, folks knowing that this is the right material for this task, which is likely felling large trees and likely helping with the shaping of things like dugout canoes and perhaps even timber structures, that kind of stuff.
Piece of wood to make what we would recognize as an axe.
Yes, so usually it's a bent haft. The haft is actually made from you split usually a water maple or something like that, a hardwood. You bend it over and then haft it on the bottom, and it actually makes a bit of a vise for it. But the estimate has been that these axes can take up to 300 hours to make. So a lot more labor intensive to make than a flaked axe. And you'll see some other styles of axe, but that they last a lot longer.
Well, that raises the issue of not the division of labor, but the pooling of labor. This must have been more than one person who made it, not one person working for at least 4 weeks straight. Would you infer a pooling of labor and passing this object from one person to the next to get it done?
You could infer that, or you can also infer that, there is a lot of art that is made during this time, and that's one of the things that people have always looked at is this how much free time do people have by how much art are they making. But in a sense, I mean, we still had seasonal work that's happening at the time, and so certainly ethnographically it's suggestive that people would actually make these things themselves, and they would just have multiples that they were working on, and as they're over time they would do a little bit more work on these things to actually and then finish them. They're almost like projects that people are working on, and so that's the ethnographic evidence of these neophyte acids which are made in the southwestern U.S. is that they, as people would carry them with them and just work on it a little bit over time until they complete them, and that those were actually being completed by individuals. So.
Well, and then there's the prescience and perseverance to know that if you keep flailing away at this, you are going to be able to shape it. And when it's 5 weeks later that it's going to be shaped,
yep.
You really have to be patient, prescience, and persevere, don't you?
Absolutely. And also, the raw materials, it's not like some of these smaller tools. I mean, that's a heavy object that's being carried around. And so it also suggests, how are people transporting these? Are they, putting them in a bundle and carrying them, or is this further evidence these are found on lakes? It's almost, it's pretty clear that people likely had watercraft at the time. And so is this, it doesn't matter to carry this as much because you actually have a vehicle that's transporting these things. And so you might be able to have, a number of these projects that are on the go over time. So.
Well, in part because you've done work in Australia, I have to raise the story of the stone axe given by maybe even archaeologists to some indigenous people there, thinking they were doing a favor, and yet they gave the steel axe to women when the men were away trading stone axes for other goods and services, and you know the story better than I do, perhaps, that they destroyed the social organization and were not actually doing anybody a favor.
Well, that's right, and also, I mean, there's some really neat parallels to that here around, as soon as people could move to different materials, and it made sense, they were moving to them. But what was interesting about the early trade goods that we have here, European trade goods, is they're analogs, they're exact analogs. So you have the traders, and this is something I think is really interesting, would be interesting subject for some, detailed examination, is we have first copper and brass harpoons and things that are toggling harpoons that look exactly like some of the indigenous tools, same form, just slightly better. And then over time, those move to be made out of wrought iron, which is obviously even more resilient, but requires, instead of just cutting something out of a sheet of brass, it actually requires some forging. And so, you get a specialization and an industry that builds up to then replace what was likely happening with First Nations, and it becomes a bit of a, what effect that actually had, that those individuals are now going after beaver pelts and those kind of things to trade for those as opposed to making them themselves. But yeah, even with the Europeans, there's a really interesting thing there around the first, at Fort Latour or Portland Point in St. John, the earliest trade goods that we see, that we've inferred as the earliest trade goods, are all cut from sheets of copper. And then, in the second phase of the occupation of the site, you actually have forged, analogs being made, and then the style changes because these are thicker, they're a different function. But the earliest ones, which are, the question would be, is a bone tool actually any worse than a copper or a bronze thin sheet tool? And we've often thought about doing some experimental work with that, because the material is you could work hard in it, but it's very malleable. And so is that in fact a better tool than the one that people were using previously?
But today we have the parallel existence of both disposable tools and long-lasting tools, and probably the example that comes to mind is the disposable tools in an emergency room in a hospital because they don't want to autoclave or clean them, whereas much more finer and expensive tools in the operating theater, which they do autoclave, clean, and reuse multiple times. So maybe both are good.
Well, that's right. And you also have curated tools. I mean, it's pretty clear over time from the polish that's on certain of these tools that people carried them for a long time. I mean, I mentioned previously that we have tools that people almost certainly found a couple thousand years after they were made, that people then would, that the people who found them would modify them and continue to use them, and then they would have been discarded again, and we find them. So we have those tools, but we also have things that almost certainly look like heirlooms, where they've been so polished and so curated that they seem to be those kind of things. And so just very much like nowadays, most of the tools on sites that never get any attention are utilized flakes. And I taught a course on ancient technology, and we rendered a large fish completely with no formal tools, just with using these flakes. And what was nice about them is they're razor sharp when you make them. And as soon as they start going a little bit dull, you can retouch them a couple times, and then you can just discard it and get another one. And it's way more, they're almost like X-Acto knives in that sense. And we find those all over the sites. But the things that get the most attention are these formalized tools. But if you were just to look at the relative of utility of these tools, the utilitarian expedient tools are likely equally as important, if not more important. It's just a bunch of photos of flakes are it's harder to illustrate the variability within those than something like these tools, which likely took a lot longer to make.
Julian Elso, Teben, alle men get more some